Britain had annexed Egypt from Turkey's Ottoman Empire in 1882, and by the time it was made a protectorate in 1914, Cairo had become the centre of British power in the Middle East. The presence of imperial troops in the region was of vital strategic importance, for the Ottoman Empire under Sultan Muhammad V was in alliance with Britain's much-feared rival, Germany. Together with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, these countries made up the Central Powers, and pitted against them were the three allies, Britain, France and Russia. From the Ottoman capital, Constantinople in Turkey, the Sultan ruled over the last of the great Islamic empires. It had been in almost terminal decline for decades. Yet the fate of the Ottoman Empire was to be sealed by the outbreak of the First World War in August 1914.
But the destiny of Palestine in the end was determined less by pieces of paper than by the military realities which were taking place there. Early in 1917, the British were embarking upon the spectacular campaign which was to lead to its conquest. General Allenby, who commanded this glamorous operation, was Lloyd George's man, and the new Prime Minister. Mobility unheard of on the Western Front was the order of the day. The only really interesting part of the war, said Lloyd George of a campaign in which historic cities were to fall. But Lloyd George's principle of what I have, I hold, applied there too.
The British Army also had big success this week, though, in the Middle East. On the Palestine front, where they had attacked and failed twice at Gaza so far this year. But now it would be a different attack. They had spent a 2-month campaign of deception aimed at convincing the Ottomans under Kress von Kressenstein that Gaza was again the target, including having false orders captured. A few weeks ago, right? A British officer had allowed Turkish guards to chase him from their guard post, and just as he escaped, he dropped a haversack smeared with horse's blood, so it looked like he had been wounded. The sack contained details of the next attack on Gaza and the impracticality of an attack on Beersheba. So now the British offensive against Beersheba under General Edmund Allenby kicked off October 31st. The Turks were totally fooled and suddenly saw 40,000 men bearing down on them. The first attackers to go into action were the New Zealand Mounted Rifles, but troops of the Australian Mounted Division, the 4th Light Horse Brigade, in spectacular fashion, launched a full-on improvised cavalry charge using sharpened bayonets as swords. See, aerial recon showed that the Turks had neither barbed wire nor anti-cavalry ditches. The 4th Brigade took over 1,000 prisoners. At a mile distant, their 1,000 hooves were stuttering thunder. They were an awe-inspiring sight, galloping through the red haze, knee to knee and horse to horse. Machine guns and rifle fire just roared, but the 4th Brigade galloped on. The last half mile was a berserk gallop with the squadrons in magnificent line. They plunged up the slope, the Turkish bayonets thrusting up for the bellies of the horses. We heard the mad shouts as the men jumped down into the trenches. A following regiment thundered over, and to a triumphant roar of voices and hooves was galloping down the half-mile slope right into the town. Beersheba had fallen.
Covering his right flank with a small mobile force and Lawrence's Arab guerrillas, Allenby sends his cavalry along the coast, where they break the enemy lines and swing to the east. The Turks, threatened with envelopment, retreat northeast in disorder, and he strikes the Turks on September 19, 1918, in a series of attacks that will become known as the Battle of Megiddo, the place where, according to the Bible, the final struggle between good and evil will be waged. Armageddon. Chaos that follows. The British take many prisoners. An entire regiment of Arab troops drop their guns and leave the field of battle. In the retreat toward Damascus, British planes drop 9 tons of bombs on the enemy. The roads are strewn with dead soldiers, horses, and demolished wagons.
I was more drawn to the idea of learning about people than of killing them. The only thing I killed all the war was a marauding dog, and I feel sorry about that still.
The Turkish armies are in retreat, and General Allenby is in hot pursuit. He wants to destroy as much of the enemy as he can while he has the upper hand. Allenby turns to the east, toward the holy city of Jerusalem. The symbolic history of that ancient city, sacred to Christians, Muslims, and Jews, is more important at the moment than another great victory against the Turks. Lloyd George has already told Allenby to take Jerusalem before Christmas. The religious significance is not lost on Christians among the British troops.
Ford's Tin Lizzies ploughed through the sandhills and raced along the coast tracks, where Pharaoh's war chariots had travelled. A derelict tank lay in no man's land, within rifle shot of where Samson's primitive weapon of the jawbone of an ass had proved more deadly.
Well, you know, in some respects it was a crusade. But Allenby is really sensitive about this because he doesn't want it to be called a crusade. A lot of his soldiers were Muslim. I mean, his labor force, for example. He also had Indian troops. And so he doesn't want this sort of Christian versus Muslim conflict. And he just doesn't want it called that at all. But you couldn't help but be aware, if you were a British soldier, that you were going into Bethlehem or that you were getting closer to Jerusalem.
On a night of rain and bitter cold, British forces attacked the holy city of Jerusalem on December 7th, 1917. The enemy offers strong resistance at first, but they are only 15,000 men against overwhelming enemy numbers. They begin to withdraw from the city. 4 centuries of Ottoman rule have come to an end. On December 11th, General Allenby enters Jerusalem on foot out of respect for the city. He is the 34th conqueror of Jerusalem in its long, volatile past. After a campaign that has lasted 40 days and 40 nights, with the loss of 18,000 men, the British soldiers have delivered a Christmas present to their nation. In the city, Allenby delivers a proclamation to the crowd and dignitaries gathered.
Since your city is regarded with affection by the adherents of 3 of the great religions of mankind, and its soil has become consecrated by the prayers and pilgrimages of multitudes of devout people of those 3 religions for many centuries, therefore do I make it known to you that every sacred building, monument, holy spot, shrine, or customary place of prayer, of whatsoever form of the 3 religions, will be maintained and protected according to the existing customs and beliefs of those to whose faiths they are sacred.
The Turks lose 25,000 men in the struggle that began October 31st. They are down but not out, and still hold a strong defensive line from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea. The British offensive in Palestine is stopped cold, just when it is poised to capture Damascus and press on to Istanbul itself. Allenby can do nothing but watch his opportunity slip away. Yes, the holy city of Jerusalem is in the Crusaders' hands, but peace still lies somewhere beyond its walls.
The reality of the British occupation, the justification of that presence by the promises to the Zionists, all this led to the assignment of Palestine to Britain by the great powers. But what of the Arabs of Palestine during the last years of the Great War? They hadn't been consulted, or for that matter even informed about the Balfour Declaration. They were leaderless and confused. What they saw throughout the Middle East was a new and alien occupying power, a power whose intentions were unknown to them. The Balfour Declaration was to provide the legal basis, with all its contradictions, for the British presence there for nearly 30 troubled years.
Here I have raided the Hejaz Railway, 40 miles east of Jordan, and have done much damage, but my little show dwindles now into a very insufficient affair in comparison with events in Europe.
In 2 days, the Turkish 7th and 8th armies are virtually destroyed. The disaster at Megiddo forces the Turkish general staff to realize that the war is lost in Palestine. It is only a matter of time before the Allies fight their way to Istanbul.
So in 1920, Herbert Samuel arrived in Palestine to govern it for Britain as the first High Commissioner. Samuel had first circulated the cabinet with the national home idea in 1915 and was, as most Arabs perceived, a Jew. Palestine was to be ruled as a mandated territory. In other words, the newly formed League of Nations had given Britain a mandate to rule it in a particular way. The mandatory powers, Britain in Palestine, France in Syria and Lebanon, were in the role of friendly big brothers. They were to bring the natives on. But the British mandate for Palestine, which Herbert Samuel was to apply, differed from the others, for incorporated into it were the very words of the Balfour Declaration about establishing a Jewish national home. No longer a declaration of intent from a British government to a private citizen, but something with a claim to validity in international law.
Hi everyone and welcome to the Montreal Arabic Corner, and this is our 78th episode devoted to Edmund Allenby of Britain. He's an army general, the hero of British Jerusalem operations against the Ottoman Empire in the First World War, and he was appointed later on as the High Commissioner of Egypt between 1919 and 1925. He sat the exam for the Royal Military College in Sandhurst in 1880, was commissioned as a lieutenant and then captain, joining his regiment in South Africa. Allenby participated in the local wars at Zand River on May 1900 and other battles known as the Boer War in South Africa. The Second Boer War was fought from 1899 to 1902 for 3 years. The war was over the UK's influence in South Africa. The war continued for years with African Boer guerrilla warfare until harsh British countermeasures brought them to terms. Allenby was promoted to local lieutenant colonel in 1901 and to local colonel. He was nicknamed as the Bull due to an increasing tendencies to tactical counterattacks and for his sudden blowing outburst of explosives rage directed to his subordinates. Combined with his powerful physical frame, Allenby stood 6 feet 2 with a barrel chest. He moved to Egypt, then joined a British expeditionary force during the First World War. Allenby served on the Western Front at the outbreak of war in August 1914. He was sent to France to fight the German army with a British expeditionary force. He became known for his tactical counterattacks. Many of Allenby's officers believed that he was incapable of any emotions except rage, but he was a loving father and husband who was intensely concerned about his only child, Michael, who was serving in the front. The British War Cabinet was divided in debate in May 1917 over the allocations of British resources between the Western Front and other fronts, and needed a new commander. When Allenby received his assignment, his first belief was a joke because he was thought that the war in Europe would be decided on the Western Front. Repeated losses to the Turkish army and the stalled Western Front left many leaders, including Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, to believe that taking Palestine was the right decision. Allenby arrived Egypt on 27th of June 1917, and on 31st of July 1917 he received a telegram from his wife saying that his son, Michael Allenby, aged 19, had been killed in action, leading Allenby to break down in tears in public while he recited the poem. Afterwards, Allenby kept his grief to himself and instead threw himself into his work with icy determination without a break. Allenby assessed the Turkish army's fighting force. He estimated that he could take Jerusalem with 7 infantry and 7 cavalry divisions. Allenby understood the desert and spent much time working to ensure his soldiers would be well supplied at all times, especially with water. Allenby also saw the importance of good medical treatment and insisted that proper medical facilities be created to treat all of the diseases common in the Middle East. He was eventually ordered to take the Turks in southern Palestine. Allenby quickly won the respect of his troops by making frequent visits to the front line. He moved his command from Cairo to Rafah in Sinai border and near the front lines of Gaza, and he reorganized his forces into 3 corps to battle. This is his style. He also employed Arabic irregular forces which were operating in Arabian interior. he allowed 200,000 pounds to be monthly to be sent to Lawrence, T.E. Lawrence. He's the Lawrence of Arabia hero of the film. Lawrence said about Allenby, he was physically large and confident and morally so great that the comprehension of our littleness came slow to him. He estimated 2 lines of Turkish defense, one from Gaza in the south to Beersheba, about 30 miles, and from Jaffa, higher up, from Jaffa to Jerusalem, about 50 miles, with a threat from the German forces. Allenby and his command agreed that sufficient British Empire troops were already in place to take and hold Jerusalem. The British Army lost the Battle of Gaza twice, with heavy casualties. So Allenby would have to try for the third Battle of Gaza. That was between the 31st of October and 7th of November 1917, by avoiding direct charge on Gaza altogether and surprising the Turkish defenders with an attack at Beersheba in the middle of the Negev desert. The first step in capturing Beersheba was to send out false radio messages prompting the Turkish forces to think Britain was going to attack Gaza. An intelligence officer to drop a blood-stained bag with Allenby's messages to attack Gaza. Allenby's forces first captured the water supplies in the Negev desert, a city of Beersheba, and was able to push onward through the desert. The city of Beersheba had fallen. That was Allenby's telex. He moved to Gaza through 3 army charges against the long frontier of Gaza, which was difficult to defend. His army appeared in the middle of the city, capturing Gaza. The first line of the Turkish defense in total had fallen. Despite his casualties, he moved his forces along the coast where many conquerors before him had taken since antiquities. And his forces pushed northward toward the second Jaffa-Jerusalem line. At Jaffa, his forces turned east toward Jerusalem. At the road to Nablus, the Turks were waiting for him, and there was the Battle of Megiddo. The area near Tulkarem, Arara, Nazareth, Afula, Bisan, and Janina, and Samach in the West Bank, known also as the Judean hills, according to the biblical and Quranic accounts, and there will be the Battle of Armageddon. A war between the forces of Christ and the 2 armies of Gog and Magog, and they will eliminate, these 2 armies will be eliminated, and believers will live a year of Jubilee. The Battle of Megiddo was the final Allied offensive of the Sinai and Palestine campaign of the First World War. The contending forces were the allied Egyptian expeditionary. In his way to Jerusalem, he faced some resistance, but the defenders soon opened Jaffa Gate to the British conqueror. He and his officers dismounted, entering Jerusalem on foot out of respect for the holy city. Early December 1917. Jerusalem is important to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The people of Jerusalem saw Allenby's entrance on the foot as a sign of his modesty. He subsequently stated in his official report, "I entered the city with the presence of the French and Italian detachment and the heads of the political missions and the military attachments of France, Italy, and America. At Jaffa Gate, I was received by the guards representing England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Australia, New Zealand, India, France, and Italy. The population received me very well. Current administration, that's what he said, under which form of administration will remain the same, so long as military considerations make necessary. Every person pursue his business without fear. All sacred buildings, monuments, holy spots from the three religions will be maintained. Christians, Jewish, and Muslim community leaders in Jerusalem and worked with them to ensure that the religion sites of all three faiths were respected, reflecting on his desire to avoid having his campaign being presented as a religious war. Allenby sent his Indian Muslim soldiers to guard the Islamic religious sites and the Aqsa Mosque. He was mindful of the pan-Islamic propaganda of the Ottomans, who proclaimed a jihad against the Allies in 1914, insisting he was fighting merely the Ottoman Empire, not Islam. The citizens of Jerusalem were welcoming him because they were glad the Ottomans were gone, and cautious as they did not want the British to stay long. Following an extended series of battles, the Ottoman line was broken and Damascus fell on 1st of October, Homs on 16th of October, and Aleppo on 25th of October, with the threat of Istanbul being occupied. The Ottoman Empire capitulated on the 30th of October 1918 with the signing of the Armistice of Modoros. It was the end of the Ottoman Empire, no doubt. Allenby had a humanitarian side to allow a train filled with wheat and nutritions to leave Egypt to poor families in Palestine, known then as the charity train or Qatar al-Rahma, in addition to initiate paving roads and governmental bureaus and erecting schools. But the situation in Egypt blew up under martial law since 1914, and several of Egyptian leaders, including Saad Zaghloul, had been exiled to Malta. These deportations had led to rioting across the country. Allenby was needed in Cairo, so he was appointed to be High Commissioner in Egypt and Sudan, and Palestine was given to Herbert Samuel, a British politician and a Zionist Jew, before the Council of the League of Nations approved a British mandate for Palestine. Nonetheless, the military governor, Allenby, withdrew to Cairo as High Commissioner until 1925. Samuel's appointment to High Commissioner of Palestine was controversial. While the Zionists welcomed the appointment of a Zionist Jew to the post, the military government, headed by Edmund Allenby and Louis Balls, calls Samuel's appointment highly dangerous. Indeed, it was an error to lose Allenby as a governor to Palestine. If he had, the history of Palestine would be definitely went another direction, the right direction. In Egypt, Allenby had to face disruptions by demonstrations against British rule. Allenby's first response was reconciling. He persuaded the colonial office to allow Zaghloul and his delegations wafd, who were in exile, to travel to France and return to Egypt. In early 1921, there were more riots and demonstrations that were blamed on Zaghloul. This time, Allenby ordered that Zaghloul and 5 other leaders to be deported to the Seychelles. 16 rioters were executed. Meanwhile, Allenby traveled to London to present to his government the end of the martial law in Egypt and drafting a new Egyptian constitutions and the return of Zaghloul. The draft constitutions was published, leading to the formation of a Zaghloul government January 1924. Did it help? It didn't. In May 1925, Allenby retired from the service and returned to England. He enjoyed a period of celebrity in the UK and the United States as well. Immediate after the First World War, he went for a last fishing trip in age 74. He died suddenly from ruptures on May 14, 1936. He was 75. Thank you for listening. إدموند اللنبي عسكري وسياسي وإداري حكومي بريطاني اشتهر بدوره في الحرب العالمية الأولى، حيث قاد قوة الاستطلاع المصرية في الاستيلاء على فلسطين وسوريا عام 17 و 1918، وأيضا حرر القدس من الأتراك. ولد اللنبي في أسرة لها قدر من الثراء في إبريل 1861، وتخرج من الكلية العسكرية الملكية في ساندهرست 1881، وانضم إلى فرقة فرسان الإنجليز نيك السادس المتواجدة بأفريقيا، حيث خدم لمدة 6 سنوات في الزولولاند، ثم التحق بعد ذلك بكلية الأركان في كيمبرلي بإنجلترا، وبعدها عاد إلى جنوب أفريقيا ليشارك في حرب البوير. أرسل اللنبي إلى مصر ليكون القائد الأعلى لقوة الاستطلاع المصرية اللي هي الإيجيبشن إكسبيديشنري فورس في يونيو 1917. من أول أعمال اللنبي كان دعم جهود لورنس العرب ب20,000 جنيه استرليني في الشهر. بعد إعادة هيكلية قواته النظامية استطاع اللنبي النصر في معركة غزة الثالثة، وذلك بمفاجأة المدافعين الأتراك عنها بهجوم على بئر السبع. لكن الجيش البريطاني تكبد خسائر فادحة، ولا زالت هناك آثار لذلك، منها مقبرة الجيش البريطاني المحفوظة في غزة بالقرب من مدينة دير البلح. ثم قاد جيشه ليافا عن طريق الشاطئ، ومن هناك اتجه نحو الشرق لمدينة القدس اللي هي خط الدفاع الثاني تبع الأتراك. لكن جيشه تصادم مع الجيش التركي على طريق نابلس، ووقعت أكبر معركة هناك عرفت بمعركة ماجيدو بين الجيشين البريطاني والتركي في نفس السهل الذي ذكرته الكتب المقدسة معركة اللي هي أرمجدن بين المسيح والمسيح الدجال وجيوش ماج وماجوج ونهاية العالم. وصل اللنبي السير بجيشه لمدينة القدس وقابل بعض المقاومة، لكن سرعان ما انسحبت الحامية التركية، وبقي مدخل مدينة القدس باب يافا مفتوحا له بحراسة واستقباله كله. وقابل هناك فرقة مسلحة ممثلين البعثات الأجنبية في استقباله. دخل اللنبي مدينة القدس راجلا إجلالا للمدينة المقدسة في 11 ديسمبر 1917. كان أول حاكم عسكري بريطاني على فلسطين، وترك خلفه أعمالا من تعبيد طرق إسمنتية وجسر اللنبي عن نهر الأردن اللي صلح وظبط. هو صاحب فكرة قطار الرحمة من مصر لفلسطين لحمل المؤن ومساعدات لأهالي فلسطين بعد أن رأى الجوع ووضع أهالي فلسطين كان متدهور أيام تركيا من الفقر والعازة. انتقد تعيين هربرت سامويل سياسي يهودي صهيوني بريطاني كأول مندوب سامي لفلسطين بالرغم كان زعيم حزب ليبرال ووزير سابق بأنه في خطورة على فلسطين وأهلها من وضع هذا الرجل، لكنه عاد لمصر كمندوب سامي في عام 1919 في الفترة التي كانت مصر تعج فيها بالمظاهرات ونفي سعد زغلول. حقا لو بقي أدموند اللنبي يحكم فلسطين لغير التاريخ وما آلت إليه فلسطين من بعده من مشاكل ومصائب وتقسيم وحروبات، ولا زلنا نعيش هذا الوضع بكل أسف. في عام 1925 رحل اللنبي على المعاش وعاد إلى لندن محاضرا ورجل مجتمع، وخاصة بعد انتهاء الحرب العالمية الأولى، وتوفى في رحلة صيد السمك في مايو 1936 عن عمر يناهز 75 سنة. حياة هذا الرجل تسرد تاريخ وسياسة فترة هامة في بداية تاريخنا الحديث في فلسطين ومصر والمنطقة العربية. أشياء كثيرة ممكن نتعلم من هذا الرجل، سواء في إدارته للمعارك واستراتيجياته وبني إدارة حكومية في فلسطين من لا شيء، وكان يتعامل وكيف يتعامل المحتل مع المحتل. لكن لازلنا نقول بريطانيا الاستعمارية والمحتل، كنا قد أقمنا أنظمة وطنية أسوأ في إدارتها وحكمها وخدماتها من الانتداب البريطاني. شكرا على استماعكم.
A wedding without a bride. Such is the custom in Egypt. So when the Iranian crown prince arrives for his wedding to the beautiful Egyptian princess Fawzia, he does not set eyes on her until after the marriage contract has been signed by the King of Egypt, her brother. Now they are together for the first time on their wedding day. A mighty procession representing the public services of Egypt is organized in honor of the royal wedding. And this is witnessed by the newlyweds to the great delight of the populace. Their beloved little princess has married her Prince Charming. So Cairo honors the occasion in fitting style.